An interesting session, but that may be from my point of view.
Can you all hear Dr. Birren? Barely. They're having a hard time hearing you. Let me see if talk louder. Testing. Try talking into that.
Can you hear me better this way? Yeah. All right. Well, I may run over time, but Cheryl can call time out on me. There are two aspects today. One is the highly personal account of an individual life. You know, there's no one like you. Each person is unique and individual, and how you got organized over the lifetime. And then there are all the academic interests in research. How do these add up? I've talked about this a little in a previous session about how men and women interpret their lives, and how does that interpretation evolve over the lifetime. We don't know so much about the later years because the later years have not gotten much attention in the universities. Now we have the Emeriti Center, so there's a growing interest in the later years. When we were, just before we came in the room, I made the comment about change, and when I went to elementary school, I wore knicker pants and stockings, and girls wore a different pattern of dress. All that's evolved now. Things have changed. Some of us have out-of-date ideas in our lives about growing up, because when you've grown up, one of the first houses I lived with my parents had gas lights in it. Did any of you ever live in a house with gas lights? No. So culture evolves, we interact with that culture, and that's the pattern of our life, the unique experiences and how you add it up, the original self that you are. Now I've got some other things that I wanted to talk about. In addition to our individual lives, telling the story of ourselves and sharing them with others, that has an effect if you do it in a small group. That's what the guided autobiography group is about here. Telling and sharing your life story. And it involves changes in your orientation. You hear what other people have lived through, and you say, oh, that reminds me of something like that. So it primes your memory. Your memories are richer. Also, you change your view of other people. You hear other people's growing up, and despite the fact that they may have had different experiences, you bring them more like you are. These are the changes, for example, that are involved with research at the moment. If you're doing autobiography, it's a personal thing for you, but then the researchers want to know what's the effect of doing it. And one of the outcomes is that you leave a little bit of history behind. Here I had a book that was given to me by our son, Jeff, who is a graduate of USC. He did a master's in history here. A narrative of a revolutionary soldier. This man was literate during the Revolutionary War. He was 16. He joined the Revolutionary Forces. And it talks about what it was like. And I never knew this view of the Revolutionary War. Often you view major events, the Great Depression, wars, natural disasters, in terms of the big picture, the hero figures. the political leaders and others from the top down. But here was a 16-year-old boy fighting for the revolutionary, the colonists, if you will. One of the things I didn't know is that they had no food distribution. They went from area to area, and they had to steal food from the farms in order to get along. One occasion, they went for 2.5 days without any food. Is that your idea, the Revolutionary War? What it was like as a young teenager fighting for the colonists? So this adds something to history. So we bring that up to date a little bit, say, well, what's the history of USC? What was it like in the early days of USC? And how does it differ now? And what does that teach us? I know two somewhat funny stories about USC. I had a woman who was interested in autobiography, and I think she graduated from here around about 1916. And she and about 3 or 4 other students wanted to organize a graduation dance. You might call it a prom. The president called them in and said, if you organize a dance, none of you will graduate from the university. Imagine that, the point of view that dancing didn't fit in with the university tradition. Then there was another one that had a little bit of humor. Just before World War II, the president of the university, and this is another story that was told to me by a man, he called the faculty men together because they were smoking on campus. And he said, you men got to take your butts off campus. It caused such a laugh that the president was embarrassed. But so there are funny things and big things that happen in the course of a university. Here we are in the Ethel Percy Andrus Gerontology Center building. I have to give you some of the background of this. It shows the flow of history in a personal sense. Ethel Percy Andrus was the principal of Lincoln High School over in East Los Angeles. When she finished and retired, she got $60 a month pension. She then, with the retired teachers in California, put pressure on the state legislature to raise teachers' pension, and they were successful a bit. Then the issue came up, and this is in the 1960s, early 1960s. You couldn't get health insurance in this country if you're over 65. Can you imagine that today? You could not get health insurance. And she got involved with the Teachers Association in New York. And the New York teachers wanted health insurance. But they proposed this to the major companies. The major companies said, no, we don't write insurance, health insurance for people over 65. It's a high risk. There's no money in it for us. Out-of-date idea. Ethel Percy Andrus then met a young man who was just getting into the insurance business, Leonard Davis, who endowed the school here, the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology. And they agreed they would try to get health insurance in New York. And if they lost money, then the New York teachers would underwrite the loss for the health insurance for that year. Leonard Davis proposed to make any profit from underwriting the insurance, he would use that for the advertising. Well, what do you know what happened? It was a success. Not only didn't lose money, it made money. So health insurance for teachers, retired teachers, spread across the country. And then the next step was the public wanted health insurance. Can you imagine coming into the early 1960s and the teachers were getting health insurance if you were over 65? But if you were retired and you weren't a teacher, you couldn't get it. And what did that lead to? It led to the founding of the AARP, now the largest organization in this country, public organization. Its magazine is the most widely read magazine in the country today. Think of the evolution of this from the early 1960s to now, and the interaction with people's lives. My father never had health insurance. My mother never had health insurance. They didn't have Social Security. All of those things were brought in, but the circumstances surrounding how they were brought in interacts with your personal histories, but also with social history. And sometimes the social history shows that we have out-of-date ideas about what should be going on. I'll bring that up in another context in a few minutes. One of the issues is that we have not recognized very much the lives of older people and the transitions into retirement. Here's a magazine, Aging Today. It's the American Society on Aging. And in the recent edition, it says, recognition rights create new meaning in later life. So the question is, when people retire from the university, should they get a different cap and gown? Should there be some ritual? When I was in Japan quite a few years ago, when women turned 65, they got a special gown, an obi, that recognized them. So on special occasions, the women could wear their obi, and it was recognition. Now, perhaps the America, I can think of some recognition rights to be created for older people. And I just want to read an excerpt from this recent publication. I just read it this week. Increasing longevity calls for the creation of new social roles for older people, new forms, definitions, understandings, and expressions of productivity, beauty too, sources, success, meaning, and purpose, one that benefits society as well as personal well-being. It calls for new approaches to how we view and live out the natural experience of aging, living in an authentic, skillful way that prepares us to meet the challenges and seize the opportunities that can make late life the most meaningful stage of all. Make late life the most meaningful stage of all, a time of reinvention and renewal. That's an interesting thing. How do you feel about that one? Reinvention and renewal, and the most vigorous form of life. This one prompted me to think about a designation of a new subsample of older people. One of the things we have to realize is the incredible diversity of older people. As I stand here at age 92, I have colleagues that have had Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, heart disease, and other things. But then I have others that are opening up and exploring new worlds, what I call the late life bloomers. And this relates to the amount of age that's been added in the last 100 years. In 1900, the average life expectancy was 47 years. Imagine that. And then by now, for both sexes combined, it's about 78, 79. Women are a little bit older, about 80. If you're educated, you're going to have a longer life expectancy too. So this means if you're retiring at age 60, you could have another 20 years, a gift of long life. And how do you want to spend that? The old model was, you're done, buy a new rocking chair. The new look is, what? Reinventing yourself, following some goals that you set aside for some purpose. The concept now, the late life bloomers, those people who are so involved with the issues of living, work, family, managing money, managing housing, all of those things, they diminished a little bit, and the people are relieved. They're educated, and this has led me, after reading that article, to think about the mellow people, the mellow years. There's a period of time after retirement, what I would call the mellow years, in which you're not under stress for many little problems. Like the old automobile, it may need new tires, it may need some new spark plugs. But you arrive in this period, and I think there's a population of the mellow seniors, and they're interested in volunteering for things. They give away their money for philanthropy, like Bill Gates. There are people, the other evening, Betty and I had dinner with a couple where we're living now called the University Village, and she said she is still the chairman of the board of the company her father founded. And she sort of inherited this. Imagine that. I think she's about 80, 75 to 80, chairman of the board. And then she's given money to help the Norris Cancer Center, giving money away. And so Bill Gates, when he made his money, is now giving that money for international health causes. So this is part of what I would conceive of as a new emerging population, the emerging elderly, mellowing elderly. They like mentoring. Partly it's reflected in grandparenting. When you're raising children, their daily concerns about eating and transportation to school, books, and did you do your homework, and all of those things. But later on, those children are adults. They have grandchildren now. So you can relate to those grandchildren on an emotional basis. How are you feeling today? What's going on? Do you want to go to Disneyland? Encouraging that mellowed experience. So I think that one area of research is going to be looking into the mellow generation. I'll give you another extreme example. When I was dean here, I had a visitor come in one day, and I was told to come out to the lobby to meet her. She was 102 years old. And I came out and shook her hand. Now, I've forgotten her name. My memory isn't perfect. And I said, why did you come to the Gerontology Center? She said, I wanted to know what a Gerontology Center did. Oh. And I said, well, how did you get here? Oh, she said, I took the bus. And then I said, well, where'd you come from? Oh, I really come from Chicago, but I was visiting some friends here. 102, taking a bus across Los Angeles to find out what a gerund. Is that your concept of what it's like to be 102? And then she died at 104, and I got a letter from a friend of hers that she died peacefully over a period of 3 months. That's a new look at old age. You know, you accept your life. Have you lived it? You've come to terms with it. You don't want to feel much pain, so you ease out. And she died over a 3-month period peacefully. And I think that's part of the emerging mellow years, as opposed to traumatic things where you have a sudden heart attack. When I was young, people died when the family was in process. Orphans were a big issue. The average family disintegrated before the last child left home by death of one of the parents. Now, orphans are not a problem. But anyway, we have some stereotypes about older people, and we have to recognize their potentials. But that's an issue for research. There's another item in this little publication. This sounds strange in the context of current publication. Sounds strange. This article is called "The Beauty of Aging, A Journey to a New Passion and Vision of Older Age." And this woman had done interviews and some photographing of what she called the stars of the beauty of aging. I don't know who these women are, but here's a publication recognizing the beauty of old age. Hedda Bolgar, anybody know who Hedda Bolgar is? And then Betty Blackstone, Judy Leinhardt, and others. So here's a recognition of older women in their later years. What I've been doing is talking about the evolution of social change in the context of older lives. Adding 30 years to life expectancy in 100 years challenges our cultural ideas about what older people are like. We have a whole new group of older people, innovative. Yet another innovation, a point of view about old age, is a book I've been reading, Freakonomics. Has anybody here seen the book Freakonomics? Interesting tests of the interpretations of life from different perspectives. This encourages us to open our minds a little bit about old age and what its potentials are. One of the aspects of change is the fact that I do think we're a more efficient society than we were before. When I think of the history of the Gerontology Center, we opened up here before there were desktop computers. We had to get a mainframe computer. And before I came here at the National Institutes of Health, we had a mainframe, and that came in. But at that particular time, a major publisher, Simon & Schuster, told me there had been an offer of a book on computers. The publisher turned it down. Who would want to read a book about computers? think of how out of date that is. So here we are as individuals. We have out of date ideas, but also some of our professions have out of date ideas. They all have to be tested. So then I visited the RAND Corporation one day, and they were bringing in some desktop computers. So I came back here and I said to some of the staff, I think we better get computers. And that was about 1975 when the desktops came in here. Now, very efficient, right? Computers make it efficient. But I think we're also in an age, an era in which we went from the agricultural age about 1900, went into the industrial age to make equipment, steamrollers, steam engines, and then the gasoline car, all of that came in, and that's been followed up after World War II. We're into the information age. So we have gone through 3 eras, and here we are in the information age, and I think we're more efficient, but less personal. Example of that? Well, when I was a boy, my mother used to send me shopping when I was in 7th grade on Saturday to buy food for the weekend. Well, why did you shop that way? Well, there was no refrigeration in those days. The grocery stores had their things for 2 days maximum. Meat came in and it had to be used and sold very quickly. And then the shops were small. I met the owners of the butcher shop, the bakery, the greengrocer, and the other shops in there. They were all small. So there was a personal exchange between the people. Now you can go to Vaughn's or Ralph's, shop, and check out with your credit card without speaking to a single person. That's more efficient, but it's less personal. And then when I see people going by me on the street with a cell phone, they don't smile at me, they don't wink at me, they don't do anything. They just go by. So now you say, well, maybe the cell phone is on a personal connection for them, but that personal connection is reduced in some ways. You don't really see the emotional expression of that person you're talking to. You don't know where they are. Reading out the facial expression and posture of a person is part of the personal interaction. I want to drop back and tell a story that Betty has never heard. In 1940, see, this is personal, but it also reflects the change in society. 1940, I was 20 years old. I signed a lease on a Shell gas station, and with 2 other young men, one was going to school and the other had a job, but we were distributing our time. We sold gasoline for 15 cents a gallon. Can you imagine that? Today, what is it, $3 anyway. That's about 20 times what it was then. In a sense, I'd say the dollar today is not worth a nickel. Inflation has lowered the value of the dollar. But then we paid ourselves 25.5 cents an hour to work in the gas station. And for that, we washed the windshield of the car when it came in. We checked the oil, and sometimes we would check the tires just for, I think we have 7 gallons for $1.15 is what we had to sign up. One day I was washing the window of the car, and the woman behind it smiled at me. that's the story. And we ended up dating. Her name was Bernadette. But later I met Betty, and that windshield was crashed. But you see, the personal interaction. Now I go into a gasoline station, I put in my credit card, bingo, bingo, do you want a receipt? Yes or no? You know, remove the pump, push in what you want. It's more efficient. You get in and out faster, but it's considerably less personal. I used to ask the butcher what he recommended on a particular day, you know, what was good, or even in the bakery, what was nice. So that's another topic for research. How has the society drifted to be more efficient but less personal? And there's beginning to be some research on that. See, I'm also an academic, and I want to bring that in too. People today have fewer confidants than they did a while ago. There's some literature I can't cite at the moment, but the number of confidants and friends you have seems to be diminishing. Well, I've sort of made it clear there are two aspects of autobiography. One is the highly personal, and then the other is the academic. How does that fit into our understanding of the flow of culture and change? The big word is change in your lifetime. When I graduated from college, I thought I could predict, life was predictable. When I look back at my life, I find that I've been interacting with things that were not on the agenda, the cultural agenda. I mentioned the computer being one, another one being gerontology. Gerontology didn't exist when I was in college. Many of these things were just coming about. The evolution of gerontology is interesting. About 1947, philanthropy in New York, Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, had been sponsoring research on atherosclerosis. That was coming in. Medicine was shifting from the infectious disease period into the chronic disease period, and that was a little bit difficult. It was a positive step, and yet there was resistance, because in the infectious disease period, you looked for one cause and then one intervention. Chronic diseases has many contributing factors. I was about the 1960s, when I was at the National Institutes of Health, I was asked to make some recommendations about behavioral and social contributions to heart disease. There was a longitudinal study going on in New England, so I made, in response to the director, a series of suggestions. None of them were accepted. Why not? Because the attitude at that time was, heart disease is physiological. What does that have to do with the social context? Now we know that the social context has an important influence on health. It leads to tensions, stress, depression, and some longitudinal studies show that depressed people die sooner than non-depressed people, and their depression gets ultimately expressed in physiological diseases. Very interesting. See, so out-of-date ideas, out-of-date personal ideas. You're old at 65? No way. but then they carry forwards in the sciences and the professions. And we have to explore that. I have a bibliography that I'm going to pass out. I'm a little bit short. The students have the priority here. And this is a bibliography of autobiography, memoir, and reminiscence literature for use by scholars, students, and practitioners. There are pages and pages in here. Let's see. 76 pages. And that's what the beginning of the academic look. Autobiography, books, historical perspectives, this is the contents. Other books, autobiography, philosophy, and spirituality. That's another area of the growing, aging population, the spirituality. And then research, autobiographical memory, goes on and on. So that's the academic input. You can take many of these topics and contribute to our knowledge. So again, I want to emphasize the academic comes into this, and it's for analytical purposes, but then we got the personal experience, the individual life. If we use the computer model, we have many files in our brains, and when we are in a group, we prime what's in these files. We get these files out, but then unlike the computer, we organize them differently. We bring in the emotions, we bring in intention, and so we are capable of reorganizing our view of ourselves and bringing our view up to date, reinvigorating our view of ourselves. This is partly the experience in the group. Writing, telling your life story, and sharing it with other people, and listening to the stories of other people. In the community where we're living now, University Village, the other evening we had dinner with a man who grew up in England. When he was a baby, his family moved to India. When he was 14 years old, the family came back to England so he could go to school. At age 20, he was put in the army, went back to India and served for 8 years. Then he went back to England, but decided to move to Canada. He moved to British Columbia in Canada, married a woman. They had 2 daughters. And then when the daughters were growing up, they moved to California. Now he's retired and living in this village. Can you imagine that? In the army in India, born in England, now retired. And I have more and more stories like that to tell you of the adaptations of people. A woman born Armenian in Turkey, and the family immigrated to Los Angeles. Fascinating. Well, anyway, the students will get one of this. Some of the things I've talked about are in here in the details of autobiography. But you can drown in this. Don't regard it as somehow influencing your personal autobiography. The students will get this, and then I have some extra copies here that perhaps Jerry, you can give to the retirees, and you may have to make a few more copies. I have to skip some of the things I wanted to say. One of the interesting things for me is health interacting with aging. The Los Angeles Times now produces a health supplement section, and it talks about diet, talks about exercise, and health interventions. This is rather new. I would say that's evolved in the last 5 years. There didn't used to be a health section of the newspaper. But now I want to go back to something. When I was in the Navy, I was at the Naval Medical Research Institute. I met a man who had done some studies of underfeeding in rats. His name was Cleve McKay. 1937, he found that if you reduce the diet of rats, they'll live 40% longer. We knew that in 1937, beginning to come in. Look how long that's taken in the culture to realize that overeating has a health effect. Then that was followed up by a study in Switzerland by a man also using rats, that the collagen in the tails of the rats was much more solidified as they grew older. In other words, their tails were not so flexible. That's probably not so important as the issue that the collagen was bound by oxygen molecules, the oxidative damage that occurs when you overeat. So we're now beginning to learn about the pathways by which some of these biological changes take place. It's complicated. So there are two themes about health and aging now that are important. One is the recognition that they're highly interactive processes. You don't have one thing. Stress, depression, diet, exercise interacts with the genome. The genome is important, but it doesn't explain everything. The next thing is the integration of information. Science tends to take things apart, like a jigsaw puzzle. We take a piece and run with it, but we don't put the piece back on the table to form a picture. There are now 12 million references online in physiology. 12 million references. What are you going to do about that? They're integrated. So there's an emerging view in medicine about putting the body back together again. We are organisms. There are interactions between the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the renal system, and other things. Integration is a theme coming up in medicine and physiology. But also integration is a theme for our personal lives, integrating our experiences. I had a colleague that came to USC in 1967 from the Netherlands. His name was Hans Schroets. He now has a PhD, but he's retired in the Netherlands. He has done work with what he calls a lifeline, a graph of your life, how you rate the various branching points of your life. Starting to school, was that positive? Was that negative? Your father got a new job, up. Your father lost his job, down. Now, when he reviews those lifelines, ratings of older people, he finds that older people tend to look more positively at their early life experiences. The example of that I usually use is that teacher I had, I hated her. But she was trying to do a good job. You see, you begin to turn it around. So this relates, in effect, to what I alluded to earlier, the mentoring or grandparenting of the older generation. You look more positively about the early life experiences, but you may also realize that that grandchild or that other child is experiencing something and they need a little emotional help. So you reach out to them in mentoring. Well, I have many more things to say, and what I'd like to do is stop for a moment and respond to questions. If you don't, I'm going to bore you with some more talk.
Does anybody have a question? Any of the students in the 423 class have anything they'd like to ask Dr. Birren? On a personal note, even. We heard some personal information about Bernadette that I've never heard before, Betty. Maybe that was new to you. We also, in our class, have the emeriti, retired faculty and people that are here that's going to be joining the writing part of the class. Anybody, did anything Dr. Birren said ring a bell? Or, like he said, he'll keep on going. All of you who are academics know what it's like once you hand the microphone over to an academic. George, do you have something?
Well, one of the things he said earlier when he was younger, he was talking about gas lights.
Gas lights, yeah.
Gas lights. Well, I came from a place where we had no lights at all.
Oh, great.
The only light I had for doing any kind of homework in elementary school was a little can or a little something with oil, olive oil, and a piece of cotton, and light it at the end, and you got enough light for about a little candle light, something like that.
That's amazing. Now, I can't imagine the students can think about that. My youngest son still can't believe that I had to have a black and white TV. Anybody else have anything they'd like to ask Dr. Birren? Yes.
I really want to have some equal time for the young to tell us why they're here. What inspired them to come?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. Going back into how you got in, I think maybe he's thinking how you got into gerontology to begin with. He may be thinking about how you got into this class in particular. Who would like to say something about that?
Sure. Well, I got into this class from recommendations from a lot of people. I met this girl in my other class, and she said she really, really wanted to take this class, but she never had the chance to, and she told me to do it because she really, really wanted to take it, so maybe I can do it for her.
Okay, so you're doing it not just for you, but for somebody else too. It's a great class. It's a great way for gerontology students, and also, where's Patrick? I don't know if Patrick's in gerontology or psychology, but it's a way for them to actually work with older people that maybe they haven't had that one-on-one. I can speak for myself because I graduated in the very first master's program here at USC, where Dr. Birren is the founding dean, and that was in 1977. And I know that I came into the program from a work perspective. I was a social work assistant in a convalescent hospital, and I was amazed that in the class there were many people that never had been around older people, aging people. See, forget what I'm supposed to call everybody. Everybody has a different name for getting older. So I came in from the work field, to find out the research backgrounds to give me information to go back out into the field and do my direct practice. So it's interesting for me to have the opportunity for students who maybe don't, they may think their parents are old and their parents are younger than I am. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? So I mean, age is relative. But just to have the chance for them to sit in the same class as all of you. And this is actually the third time that Dr. Birren and I have taught it. We've taught it twice now with Jerry and Laura Walker, and it's been an extremely successful program. So I'm really looking forward to it. And when we adjourn this section, we'll go back into the smaller room because I have a lot of information about the class per se that I need to get across to everybody. Anybody else want to say, besides those whose parents are in the field?
Oh, on the same time? Oh, I almost lived at University Village. How's the food there?
Oh, how's the food? See how thin he is? He works at it, though. He walks, Tai Chi.
Make a comment about food. Betty and I visited a woman we know in Waltham, Massachusetts, in the end of July. We had met her in World War II in Washington. She was a Navy intelligence person. I will tell you something. But we asked her, she's now living in a retirement village. Her husband we knew is deceased. And we said, how is it like living in this village? Oh, she said, it's very nice, but everybody complains about the food. And this is another area for research. I think, you see, if you don't have much else to complain about in everyday life, you pick on the food. That may be a generalization.
But I decided to live at the Jewish home in Reseda. I don't know if you know about that.
What's the name of it?
It's the Jewish Home for the Aging.
Okay.
They built some condominiums that are for continuing care. That's very structured like University Village. At any rate, I've lived there since last February.
How's the food?
The food, we have the same problem. We have, we've got, people that loved the dinner and people that thought it was a dud. But what I'm experiencing is that it's kind of an interesting place to live and live your life out with these people who are all kind of like in the same boat you're in, and it's like a whole structured way of dying, and I haven't sorted the whole thing out, but I'm trying to figure out what the effect of living in that kind of place is on aging.
Well, that's why you're here, Cliff, so you can be with the younger students, too.
Well, when you've sorted it out, give me your answer.
And Jim and Betty are in your second year, 2 years?
Third year.
Starting the third year.
Third year.
Jerry?
I don't think we'll reach that far.
You're on me.
Jim, you've talked about changing social roles. You've talked about changing technology surrounding us. Can you make a few comments about the changes in laws over time? The Older Americans Act is about to be renewed next year, and it has some weaknesses in it. And so there have been more state laws to try and protect older people. Have you been involved in helping get some of these bits of legislation written and passed? Do you have any general comments on the greater number of such laws in our society?
I'm somewhat weak in this area, but I'll say a few words anyway. About 1980, we created something called the California Council on Gerontology and Geriatrics, because we discovered that the state legislature had very little information about an aging population. They had other inputs, other expertise, but they had a view of aging that was even less accurate than the general public had. So the idea was to create a flow of information from the universities up to the state. Well, what were some of the mistakes that were made? Well, we're seeing that in pensions now. The rules about pension were set back when people lived about life expectancy in the 60s. So, but now, with the pension systems for state employees, they're living into their 80s and 90s. hundreds of thousands of dollars are going in, and the pension systems are being bankrupt. So the rules and laws about that have to be negotiated. This, for example, the unions, teachers' union, firemen's union, police, teachers, are all involved in keeping pensions intact. But what they have to be able to do is realize there's so much more added to the life expectancy when those laws were passed. So one issue for the laws is flexibility, adapting the laws to the evolving culture, society, and individuals' life expectancy. Did that make any sense?
Anybody else have a question or comment or anything they'd like to add before we take a short break? Natalie. I do. Come on up.
Just in terms of me being motivated to just enter the field in general was probably because my deceased grandfather had Alzheimer's disease, so I thought it would be a great way to just be able to discover at that age. I think I was 13 or 14, so I didn't know as much about it as I would like to, and it was such a great opportunity through my undergraduate curriculum as well as now the graduate curriculum to be able to do that. But for the class in general, I had heard good things about it, but I think that what I'm looking forward to most from the class is to be able to communicate with so many different kinds of personas and be able to know how to interact with people, because everyone is a different entity here, and just finding out about everyone, I think it's going to be a wonderful process. So I really appreciate the fact that you're offering it again.
Welcome. That's one of our 423 students, Natalie.
Well, it's kind of interesting. These questions are important because they bring you into new areas, new perspectives. I like to encourage you to ask questions because it leads to mutual understanding. Let's take the issue of Alzheimer's disease. Years ago, I was doing some research in Baltimore for the Public Health Service. I was giving an intelligence test to an older woman, possibly early Alzheimer's. And every time I came to a question that she couldn't answer, she would stand up and say, "Oh, you'll have to excuse me. I've got to cook dinner for my father." And it was that social interaction with her past life and the present demand, and that opened the door for me so that Alzheimer's patients have emotions, but they also have a cause. And there's a lot of research going on now between the plaques and the tangles in the nervous system. And one of the questions is that amyloid that accumulates the cause. It's a non-soluble protein that collects in the brain and stops the interaction. And there are other issues. I would think in 10 years we're going to have more insight into that. And I think we'll bring Alzheimer's disease under control. Now think of what the implication of that is. More older people in society. More people are going to live to be 100. And then the study of Parkinson's disease. There's going to be another opening there. I'm less optimistic about that one than I am about Alzheimer's, but I think something is going to come about. But this is going to add again to a growing older population and challenging our views of life. Change and adaptation. So when you're studying these things, let's suppose there's a discovery next year about the control of Alzheimer's disease, and you're involved in Alzheimer's. You have to adapt to that change, that discovery. And then we have the personal life, which we're dealing with here. We have to adapt personally. We are individuals. There's no other person like us as individuals. Each one of us has a special history. So here we are, ranging from the abstract, highly basic research to the personal lives. And here in the guided autobiography, we're exploring our personal lives and sharing them and gaining more understanding. But go back, one of the things we've always dealt with is adapting to change. I didn't talk about the fact that I've now lectured in 27 countries and 40 states. And in Asia, they're talking about the age quake, because people in India and China are living so much longer at a time when the country in 25 years got into the information age. So the children in India are moving to the city in the high-tech society, and the old folks are left behind in the rural areas. That means that their values are challenged because the culture pushed the young people to take care of the dependent older persons. The same thing is true in Japan. I'll give some more examples. I like questions.
Well, you know, what Natalie said was great, because she did say that one thing she wanted to do was to be exposed to personal stories from different peoples, and that's one thing that is going to happen, Natalie. Absolutely.
I guess mine's more of a comment, because you're talking about change. I think it was probably only 40 years ago they didn't even have a name for Alzheimer's disease. It was considered normative aging, and so yeah, senile aging. Yeah. So that's an interesting change that spurred a lot of research. And when you were talking about people continuing to get older, I think in some ways I'm wondering if it might kind of level off, because of there's so much with obesity and pollution that, although if we do find cures for Alzheimer's, then there are always other things that it might slow down the increase in aging. So I don't know.
That's a good comment. She's saying that they could level the playing field.
It's kind of interesting. Now, if I were in your small class, I would say, let's turn that around. I asked you, how would you address the issue of obesity in society today? How would you try to control it? Betty and I live in this university village. Very few obese people there. Why? They're highly educated, they have health insurance. Then one day we went into the nearby shopping center, into a Macy's department store, and we went on the Saturday afternoon. And I was incredibly impressed with the number of obese people there, because they were the people that had lower education, less money, and they were in there. So how do you deal with that? We know that obesity relates to education, socioeconomic status, education. You got an answer?
Well, not an answer to how to deal with it, but a lot of it's been it's been found to start in the womb. So I think socioeconomic status and health insurance and just availability to health care has been a big part of it, because there can be parts of inflammation in the womb that could also affect you later in your life. And so people being born into low socioeconomic status sometimes don't even have much of a chance to overcome it. So, but I don't know how to fix that.
Thank you. So a lot of the times it does start in the womb, but especially I know that USC has a lot of programs where through preventative medicine, they've been able to expose these underrepresented populations to a lot of free health events and free health clinics and just public health kind of forms of outreach so that they are exposed to what kind of resources they can use and utilize to be able to kind of switch their lives around if they were born under like those kind of conditions where they weren't exposed to those services before. So it's really good that we're able to extract what we know to them and kind of form that bridge, and it's really emphasized here. So that's why I think we're blessed that slowly it's a good change that's happening.
I earlier mentioned the idea of integration. If you were a professional member in some group, social work or medicine, and you don't have any idea about aging, you're not prepared to deal with the changes that are coming up. I proposed a few years ago that every undergraduate take a course in the human lifespan with an anthropologist, a sociologist, a psychologist, a biologist, a geneticist, all so that every young person has a view of the human lifespan and what it's like. Then they go into their specialty. Now you go into the specialty without any understanding. So like that book on Freakonomics I mentioned, the economists recently had no idea about the population and serving older people and the economic implications of what they were doing. I had a friend, a neighbor, who supplied executives to companies that were investing in Asia. And he found that the ones that just had MBAs, are there any MBAs here? I can comment negatively. He would bring people in with MBAs into a company being formed in Asia, and they had no concept of culture and the other things. So he began to bring in mostly people that had general degrees in arts and sciences. And I think that's very important for all young people to have some grasp of the human lifespan and these issues that we've been talking about. So when they go into their professions, they can initiate change and help the adaptations to change.
Emily? Oh, thank you. I had a comment actually on that too, because I took Robert Taggart Ethical Issues in Geriatric Healthcare last semester, and in terms of every student having some kind of preface or exposure to lifespan, to aging, even in terms of like pediatricians, we talked a lot about in our class in terms of grandparents caring for grandchildren and the growing numbers of those who are actually taking on full like financial and social support for these children, some in temporary cases, some in more kind of finite structured cases, and how with the waning health of a grandparent, that would very much directly influence the health and care that they could then give to their respective grandchild, but how that's a developing case in society too, especially in these very tumultuous economic times. So it's all very interrelated. So I understand it, and I agree too.
I want to respond to your allusion to pediatrics. When I was in Baltimore, I met a professor of pediatrics, and we got involved in discussing history. He said pediatrics evolved in the early 1900s when physicians were asked about food for babies and children, and they had no background. So pediatrics evolved from a very practical thing. So here you have what's now pretty basic science and professional evolving from a practical question. So the interaction between the practical, the academic, and the abstract is important.
I actually just wanted to introduce myself because I didn't get to do that formally. So, hi, my name is Emily Loynihan, and a lot of the reasons for taking this class, as Natalie stated, were very influential in my participation here in the Gerontology program, and want to study and pursue this as a field and my discipline. But as I had mentioned actually at our first class, when I was younger, my sister and I were the only children in our congregation at our first Lutheran church, which was actually the first Lutheran church here in Los Angeles. It's actually closed now, but it closed my junior year of high school, and that was a really difficult period for all of us because my mom and my father were married there. I was baptized there. I attended elementary school at the corresponding school that was attached to the church. But the majority of congregants were older adults. And so I remember vividly, sitting in the parish hall and eating, in communion with these older adults and telling their stories and narratives, and actually writing down. I have notes. I had a lot of journals when I was younger, but I would love to document that because I thought it was so special. And you were talking about earlier, I know Natalie said that she was influenced by her grandparents. My paternal grandmother was just diagnosed with frontal lobe dementia and Parkinson's. So my grandparents haven't fully disclosed to me what stages she's actually progressed to in those respective diseases, but I know that it's very hard for our family in particular, and we also have distance that's separating us, which kind of exacerbates our own relationship, my personal relationship with my grandparents. So actually just recently, my grandfather sent me an email to be my Skype buddy. And so he wants to Skype with me, and he already added me to his list of friends and contacts. So we're hoping to do that soon. But I know my grandmother, since I was very little, would always love telling stories and narratives of her own life, and still does, but remembers most acutely those of her early childhood. She may not remember what happened a minute ago or even 5 minutes ago, but she can very much reflect back to when she was growing up. And I think it's scary right now and challenging, kind of seeing this change in her and her attitude, and she's also limiting her own storytelling, so that's challenging. But also, I was going to say, I work at the Shoah Foundation on campus, and I've interned there for about 4 semesters now, and I was really excited to take this class because I've been exposed to a lot of visual history and narrative in terms of indexing Holocaust testimony. There are about just over 51,000 Holocaust testimony archived, and the Shoah Foundation was really started by Steven Spielberg after he directed Schindler's List, and he had a lot of people on set coming up to him and approaching him and wanting to share their own story. So I think it's really neat that I'll be writing and documenting, my own story in a wonderful intergenerational context, but to kind of have that bridge between the two. And actually right now I'm hoping to bridge my 2 interests in terms of what I'm doing in Shoah and in gerontology here. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting how these comments, as I say, stimulate and they prime the memories. When I went over to UCLA, after I retired here for a few years, we did a survey of the film and television industry. We sent out 6,000 questionnaires to all the guilds. They responded by saying they believed that they were the most ageist of industries. And we had a meeting. We had Bob Hope there and some other people, and we asked them questions. Why are you the most ageist of industries? They say because the marketers determine our stories. They define our market as age 20 up to 35. That's where the dollars are. They hire a young director, a young writer, a young actress, a young actor, and that's it. There are no themes on television and movies today that relate to the mellow years. Are there? It's violence, it's sex, something else. And so there you get an out-of-date paradigm. Here you have an evolving older population, and many of them have money to spend, but they're not watching television or movies. And so that's what prompted that. But I get carried away with these out-of-date ideas. Now, a lot of the ideas coming from basic research don't work out, but they're attempts to explain. For an interval in my life, I was working on rats. I dissected rat nerves, and I measured the conduction velocity of the rat nerves to see if there was an age change. I thought maybe the reason we slow down is that the conduction velocity in the nerves slow down. Believe it or not, it goes about 50 to 55 meters per second. Boom, boom, boom. But it doesn't slow down with age. So I was wrong. It's not in the conduction velocity. So not everything that comes out of basic research explains what we're trying to explain.
Yes, Tim.
Good. I just want to say a few words. I admire your getting into the field of gerontology, a very expanding field, but you will never get rich on it. The way to get rich is to save. If you make $100, you save $5 or $10, put it away. I have 4 daughters, and the way they save was they used to brown bag their lunches, and after they finish their lunch, they fold the bag and bring it back home. So I was known as the guy whose kids brought back their brown bags. So that's one way to save. I mean, you don't have to be too frugal. I'm a physician, and a lot of physicians, when they graduated from school, they go out and buy big houses, big cars, buy Mercedes and buy Cadillacs and all those. You don't have to do that. You can buy a car that's transportation. It take you from here to there, and that way you could save a lot of money. So, but in your field, you will be talking to a lot of people that creates opportunities for you. A lot of the older people, they have not only experience, they have ideas of what they have gone through and what new. So I'm a physician right now, but I have bought hospitals, I have built a bank, I have raised chickens. I raised 50,000 chickens up in Napa. I've grown plum trees to make prunes because I know as you get older, you're going to need prunes. But anyway, all these ideas that come, and I again congratulate you for being in the subject.
I just want to say a couple things that come to mind. First of all, the whole thing about diet and calories. We're preaching to the choir when we're talking to Jim Birren, because one of the stories that I love to tell about him, on his 60th wedding anniversary, he and Betty renewed their vows. I actually had to sit down and mechanically add it up. It'll be 68 years this year. Anyway, Jim wore the same tux that he was married in. Now, that is fascinating that he still fits into it, but even more fascinating that after 68 years, he still has it with him. And secondly, just to end this, because we need to go back to our class in the other room and get ready for our writing and the guided autobiography part of this class, I'd like to say that I have an idea for the marketing media to get more information and get more interest in aging populations. We'll start a new series on TV, and it will take place either at University Village or Jewish Homes for the Aged. And we'll call it Love and I was going to say sex, but I don't think I better say that. Love and Life, Love and Life in the Older Years. And I'm telling you, it'll be a bestseller. I'm certain of it.
How about Untold Stories?
Yeah, Bernadette, the Bernadettes of life, that everybody doesn't know about. Anyway, for our class, we're going to go back and meet in 125. And I think there's cookies still left there, unless the door was left open and somebody's gone in and taken the cookies.
If you want to come up, the students get your...
Oh, yeah, the book's up here. And come up and meet Dr. Birren. And thank you, Jim.
Okay. I'll go over there and give them to him. There we go.